Hey everyone, I hope things are going well for you. We've almost made it through 2020 and I'm a bit happy about that. But even though 2020 has been hard, I'm grateful that in our church, from what I've seen, it's often led to deeper relationships with other people and with God. In our groups this week, we've been looking at the story of Jesus calming the storm. That's a crazy story. If you want to read about it, it's in Mark 4, verses 35 to 41. In our groups, I started by asking the question, why did Jesus calm the storm? And people came up with different answers, like to show that he was God, to show the disciples that they were safe with him, to show his power. Now, there's probably a bit of truth in all of those, but I have to be honest, and I have to say I don't know Jesus' motivations for doing what he did. So I look at it on a simpler level. I think Jesus calmed the storm because they woke him. They woke him up. The story goes that Jesus was sleeping in the back of a boat in the middle of a storm, and his disciples feared that the boat would be swamped. So they woke him and said, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" It's not a question that shows a lot of faith or trust, but it caused Jesus to respond, and he calms the storm. So this made me think about prayer. Why do we need to ask God for things? Shouldn't he just already know and look after us anyway? It seems that God wants us to ask, and it even seems that he's more likely to respond if we're desperate. Does God want us to be desperate? Isn't that just cruel? At times in my life, it's felt like God's asleep and I'm in the middle of a storm in a sinking boat. There have been times when I've felt like I was praying to wake God up and to ask, "Don't you care if I drown?" So before I say what I get from the story, I need to say that I'm not a professional when it comes to prayer. I'm still very much just working it out as I go. But it's comforting to me that the disciples were just learning too. They didn't seem to have much on their mind except survival, and yet they woke Jesus and he calmed a storm. So I reckon God he wants us to ask and keep asking, because it's in our asking that he shapes us. I used to think of prayer as sort of a one-dimensional thing, where I ask God for what I want and he either gives it to me or he doesn't. And I don't really know why. Everything else is a bit of a mystery. But I've learned that prayer can actually be a two-way conversation, where I don't just ask, but also listen. I also listen to what God has to say to me. My prayers these days involve a lot more listening than they used to. So because I'm listening as well, that means that in the process of prayer, God is actually shaping me into someone whose thoughts and desires are in line with his. But back to the story. Jesus calmed the storm because his disciples woke him. If they didn't wake him, they probably wouldn't have seen him do that. The first step towards an answered prayer is praying in the first place. Like the disciples, I've been guilty of seeing prayer as a last resort. They didn't wake Jesus until the boat was sinking. Part of the reason might have been that a few of them were fishermen. And they would have had a lot of experience on that lake. They thought they could do it themselves. So this got me thinking about desperation. Maybe we're like the disciples in that we think that life is really our responsibility to sort out, And we only go to God when we've completely stuffed it up. So maybe it's not that God requires desperation. Maybe it's that we require desperation. We are so addicted to trying to sort things out in our own strength that we don't go to God until everything falls apart. And we've got no other choice. Like an addict, we have to hit rock bottom before we're ready to give up and accept the help that we need. I've always assumed that when Jesus said, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" I assumed he was telling them off for waking him. But maybe he was saying, "You should have woken me earlier." Maybe it was never his intention that they try and sort everything by themselves, when he was right there as a solution to their problems. So don't wait until you've hit rock bottom before you pray. Pray continuously. I wonder if there are a lot of prayers that God doesn't answer because we don't ask. I used to play cricket, and in the game of cricket, sometimes there's some debate about whether the batter is out or not. Maybe they've only just hit the ball, they've only sort of just hit the ball, and they've been caught. Or maybe they've been hit on the legs in front of the wickets, which would make them out. So what the other team does is they appeal. The whole team looks at the umpire and shouts, "How's that?" And this is an attempt to convince the umpire that they should give the batter out. And appeals do work. One time I was watching a game and the batter was hit in front of the wickets and nobody appealed except the wicketkeeper. Now, for those of you who don't know, the wicketkeeper is actually behind the batter, so they wouldn't have really been able to see. And even that guy, so the wicketkeeper, he wasn't really convinced, and his appeal totally lacked enthusiasm. He basically said, "How's that?" and he just walked away. But the umpire agreed. The guy's half-hearted appeal was all he needed to do what he already wanted to do and give the guy out. And I think it's like that with God sometimes. If you don't ask, you don't get. He wants to give us good things that we don't even think are possible. When the disciples woke Jesus, I don't believe they thought he would calm the storm. I don't believe that was even in their minds. They wouldn't have even thought that was possible. So all we need to do is ask. If Jesus calmed the storm in response to the disciples' half-hearted appeal to save them, imagine how he would respond to a prayer of real passion. So my encouragement to you over this Christmas and New Year period is pray. Pray with expectation that God is listening and he wants to bless you and everyone connected to you. But when you pray, don't just ask, also listen to what God says, because what he tells you to do is also for your benefit. And it might be an answer for someone else's prayer. So God bless. Have a good Christmas.